Most people think overnight cleaning jobs are for people who ran out of choices. Maybe that's true for some, but I always liked the silence after closing time, the way a massive shopping mall transforms once the crowds disappear, leaving only the echo of your own footsteps and the low hum of dying fluorescent lights. These dim lights take over when the stores go dark, casting this weird blue-white glow that makes everything look a little too clean, a little too empty, like you're walking through some kind of futuristic dream. That's why I took the night shift at Garland Plaza Mall in Garland, Texas, about 20 miles north of Dallas, and my name is Connor Shaw. The job pays decent. My supervisor, Maria, leaves me alone to do my thing. And honestly, after my divorce 2 years ago, the emptiness of a closed mall feels more like company than loneliness. There's something about the vast silence, the way your voice echoes if you talk too loud, that makes me feel less alone than I did in that big house with Sarah gone. I've done this for 3 years now, learned every shortcut through the service corridors, every supply closet where they hide the good mops, every creepy corner where teenagers sneak off to smoke weed and cause trouble when they think nobody's watching. The night crew is just me, Marcus on security, and Delia, who handles the food court cleanup. We usually meet up near the east loading dock around 10 to swap stories and split the floor assignments, trading complaints about the day shift and joking about which store workers we caught being lazy. Marcus has been here longer than anyone, claims he remembers when this mall opened back in 1992, and he loves to talk about how it's changed over the decades, which stores came and went, which ones always seemed cursed no matter what business moved in. That Tuesday night in October started normal enough, the same as any other shift I'd worked that month. I was finishing up the hallway near Store 247, which used to be a toy shop called Playland Adventures, but went under 6 months back when the parent company declared bankruptcy. The store's windows are covered with that paper covering they put up when places close. That ugly brown craft paper with "Coming Soon" stamped on it in faded letters, though nothing has come soon for half a year now. The place has been empty since, just gutted shelves and that weird smell of old plastic and dust that never quite washes out no matter how many times I mop the floor in front of it. I had my mop bucket and my earbuds in, listening to some true crime podcast about a murder case in Houston, when I heard it. Laughter. Children's laughter, high-pitched and bright, drifting out from Store 247, like someone had left a TV on in there. The sound was so clear, so perfectly childlike, that I actually turned around expecting to see some kid running past me in the hallway, some parent who'd gotten locked in by mistake, some explanation that made sense. I pulled out my earbuds and stood there, mop in hand, listening hard. The sound was unmistakable, that pure, delighted giggle that only comes from kids having genuine fun, the kind of laughter you hear at birthday parties and playgrounds. It echoed from somewhere deep inside that empty space, bouncing off the walls, mixing with the hum of the ventilation system. I checked my watch. 11:47 p.m. I checked the hallway both ways, looking for any sign of movement, any indication of where these children might have come from, or how they'd gotten into a locked storefront. No kids had been in this mall for hours. The doors had locked at 9 sharp, and Marcus does a perimeter check every night to make sure nobody's still inside. I walked closer to the darkened storefront, peering through the gaps in the paper covering at the abandoned toys scattered across the bare floor. Dusty stuffed animals staring back at me with their glassy eyes, and the laughter kept going, echoing from somewhere deep inside that empty space, getting louder for just a moment before fading again. I radioed Marcus right away because this kind of thing wasn't my department, And honestly, I was starting to feel that prickle on the back of my neck that you get when something feels deeply wrong. Marcus showed up about 5 minutes later with his flashlight and that perpetually annoyed expression he gets whenever something interrupts his usual rounds of watching sports highlights on his phone. I pointed him towards store 247 and played him the recording I'd made on my phone, the audio that had captured about 30 seconds of that strange laughter. The sound was crystal clear on the playback, definitely kids laughing, definitely coming from inside that dead store. And Marcus's expression shifted from annoyance to something harder to read. He walked up to the door of the storefront, tried the handle, found it locked like I knew it would be, and stood there listening just like I had. The laughter continued, that same light-hearted rhythm, like children playing some wonderful game in a place where nothing wonderful had happened in a very long time. Marcus radioed down to security headquarters in the basement to pull up the camera footage for that section of the mall, and we both waited there in the dim hallway while the sound continued unabated, our breath visible in the cold air despite the mall's climate control. When his radio crackled back with the response, Marcus went quiet in a way I'd never seen before in the 3 years we'd worked together. And I've seen Marcus deal with everything from drunk teenagers to shoplifters to a guy who once locked himself in a bathroom for 4 hours having some kind of breakdown. He asked me if I was messing with him, if this was some kind of elaborate joke, and when I swore on my mother's grave that it wasn't, he showed me his phone screen with hands that were shaking just slightly. The security footage from the camera pointed directly at store 247's entrance showed an empty hallway. The same brown paper covering and locked door we were standing in front of, stretching back into darkness. No movement, no children, no shadows shifting, no reflections in the polished floor. Nothing that would account for the laughter still drifting out from behind that door. The door never opened. We had been standing right here for 10 minutes, watching that door, and according to the footage, nothing had come in or gone out. The laughter was the only thing in that corridor, playing to an audience of absolutely no one. And Marcus and I exchanged a look that said everything we both were thinking, but neither of us wanted to say out loud. Marcus called Delia up to see for herself. And when she heard the recording played back through his phone speaker, she got this look on her face like she just swallowed something sour, the kind of expression that said she'd seen something similar before and had hoped never to see it again. She told us about a Korean grocery store back in Dallas that her cousin used to manage, a place called Seoul Mart that closed after a little girl drowned in the fish tank there during a weekend when nobody was supposed to be in the building. She said sometimes you could hear kids playing in the stockroom long after the place went dark, and her cousin eventually stopped closing the store at night because the sound scared away the night shift security guards. I wanted to dismiss that as superstition, some ghost story passed around to scare new employees, the kind of urban legend that grows up around any workplace where people work late hours in empty buildings. But the truth was sitting right in front of us in that grainy security footage, undeniable and impossible to explain away. We decided to go inside store 247 anyway because that's the kind of stupid bravery that comes with working night shifts for too long, this false sense of invincibility that develops after years of nothing ever actually happening, where you start to believe that all those scary stories are just stories. Marcus had the skeleton key that opened all the empty storefronts for maintenance checks, and within seconds, we were standing in that gutted toy shop, surrounded by scattered stuffed animals and half-assembled display cases, our flashlight beams cutting through the darkness and illuminating clouds of dust that swirled like living things. The laughter stopped the instant we stepped through the door. Not faded, not muffled, not gradually decreasing like the source was moving away. Just gone, completely and absolutely gone, like someone had flipped a switch and cut the sound off mid-giggle. We stood there in complete silence, surrounded by these faded cartoon posters peeling off the walls, our flashlights creating dancing shadows that seemed to move on their own, until Marcus pointed his light at the back wall, and I saw what he was looking at. A mirror stood there, a full-length thing that had somehow survived the closure, propped up against the wall like someone had been using it. The glass slightly warped with age, but still reflecting our faces with eerie clarity. In that mirror, I saw our reflection. Marcus with his flashlight raised, Delia clutching her phone, and me with my mop handle still in my grip. But behind us, standing in the middle of the shop floor where the play area used to be, were three small figures. Small shapes, roughly child-sized, their features too blurry to make out in the warped glass. When I spun around to look, there was nothing there, just empty floor and scattered toys and darkness. But in the mirror, the figures remained, and one of them seemed to be waving at us with a hand that had too many fingers. We ran. I need you to understand that these were three grown adults who had collectively seen enough horror movies to know better, to know exactly how these situations always end badly for whoever's stupid enough to investigate. And we still ran out of that store like the devil himself was chasing us, knocking over a display rack in our haste to get through the door. Marcus locked store 247 back up and put in a maintenance request for the mirror to be removed, classifying it as a safety hazard, blocking the emergency exit, or something equally bureaucratic that would get it dealt with without anyone asking too many questions. But when the morning crew checked the next day, the mirror wasn't there, just bare wall where it had been standing. No trace of the frame or the glass, or any indication that anything had ever been propped up in that spot. I spent the following week doing everything I could to avoid that section of the mall entirely, taking longer routes through the food court, always keeping my back to the wall whenever I had to pass by that stretch of hallway, feeling the weight of those empty storefronts pressing in on me. The maintenance request was marked complete. The mirror was logged as removed, but nobody could find it anywhere in the supply warehouse, or the lost and found, or anywhere else it might have been stored for disposal. And when I asked about it, Maria gave me a weird look and said she didn't remember approving any such work order. The official story was that it had been thrown away with the other debris from the closure. But I knew that wasn't right because I remembered how heavy that mirror was, how carefully it had been propped against that wall, positioned perfectly facing the door like someone wanted it found. I started digging through old mall records during my breaks, using the ancient computer in the employee break room that still ran Windows 7, trying to find out what had really been in store 247 before the toy shop moved in, and what all those previous businesses had been before them. What I discovered made my blood go cold in a way I hadn't felt since I was a kid having nightmares, and I spent the next 3 hours reading through old newspapers and archived lease agreements until I finally understood what we had stumbled into. Before the toy shop, the space had housed a portrait studio called Picture Perfect that lasted only 8 months before mysteriously closing without explanation. Before that, a candy store called Sweet Dreams that went under after a health code violation involving the ice cream machines. And before that, going back to the original construction of the mall in 1987, a small children's indoor playground called the Laughing Room, with a logo of a happy sun with a human face. The playground had closed after what the records called a tragic accident, but every document mentioning the incident had been marked and remarked and eventually just stamped with a generic header that said permanently sealed, and I had to fill out 3 separate forms to even access that much information. I requested the sealed records anyway because I wasn't ready to let this go, because something about those 3 figures in the mirror had gotten under my skin in a way I couldn't explain. And 3 days later, I received a thin folder with a single sheet inside it. A newspaper clipping from November 1987 described how a fire had broken out in the laughing room during a birthday party, how the sprinkler system had failed, and the emergency exits had been chained shut by a maintenance worker who later claimed he'd been told to do it to prevent theft. 3 children had died in the fire, trapped behind those chains while their parents screamed and beat against the locked doors. And the laughter we'd been hearing, I realized with growing horror, wasn't the sound of children playing at all. The nightmares started after that discovery. Vivid and terrible dreams where I'd find myself back in store 247, but transformed into something different. Something that looked exactly like a children's playground should look, with bright primary colors and plastic balls and climbing structures and all the joy that these places are supposed to hold. In these dreams, the playground was beautiful and warm, full of children running and screaming with joy, their laughter echoing off walls that seemed to stretch up into infinite darkness above, and I could never find the exit no matter how many times I tried the doors. The children would play like nothing was wrong, ignoring me completely, and the laughter would gradually slow down over the course of what felt like hours until the children were just standing there watching me, their mouths still open but making no sound at all, their eyes following me as I wandered through the playground looking for a way out. I woke up every morning at 3:47 a.m. exactly, drenched in sweat, hearing that silence in my head like a ringing in my ears that wouldn't go away. I stopped working nights after that. I told Marcus and Delia I was taking a personal leave, and when they asked why, I just said family stuff and let them fill in whatever explanation made them comfortable enough to stop asking questions. Delia understood though, maybe better than I wanted her to. She called me 2 weeks later, her voice shaking in a way that reminded me of my mother after my father died, and she told me that store 247 had been rented. Someone had signed a 6-month lease for the space without ever meeting anyone from the company in person, paying an entire year in advance with a money order that turned out to be completely untraceable when the mall's accounting department tried to verify it through the bank. The new tenant was listed as a children's charity called the Sunshine Foundation, but when Delia checked the name against every registry she could find, the IRS database, the state business records, the Attorney General's Office for Charity Organizations, there was nothing, no record that this organization existed anywhere in any official capacity. The lease had one special provision written in all capital letters. The back wall could not be altered in any way, including painting, drilling, renovation, or any structural changes. And a clause at the bottom stated that this provision would remain in effect even after the lease expired or was terminated for any reason. A week after the charity supposedly moved in, completely empty-handed as far as anyone could tell, I was sitting at home in my apartment in Garland when I heard a knock at my door, and when I opened it, there was nothing there, just the empty hallway and the flickering fluorescent light that the landlord never seemed to fix. But when I looked down, I saw a small white envelope on the floor. No stamp, no address, just my name written on the front in crayon. The letters wobbly and childish. And when I opened it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, I found an invitation to a birthday party at store 247, dated for the following Saturday at 2 p.m., A time when the mall would be full of shoppers and the sounds would blend into the background noise. Plus, a small photograph of 3 children standing in front of a playground with a sun that had a human face on it. I recognized the playground from my dreams. I recognized the children too, their faces hauntingly clear despite the grainy quality of the photograph. And I knew these were the same 3 figures I had seen in the mirror's reflection, the night Marcus, Delia, and I had gone inside store 247. I'm writing this account because I need you to understand what I'm about to do and why I have no choice but to do it. I am going to that party tomorrow afternoon. I don't have a choice anymore, and I'm not sure I want one, because every time I try to throw the invitation away, it ends up back in my pocket. And every time I try to convince myself it's a hoax, I can hear that laughter getting louder in my head. If you're reading this and you ever hear laughter coming from an empty store, walk away. Don't investigate. Don't try to help. Don't be a hero like I was foolish enough to be. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Some invitations, once received, must be answered. And some secrets buried in fire and tragedy will keep reaching out until they're finally allowed to rest, or until they find someone else to join them. My name is Connor Shaw, and I'm going to find out what really happened in the laughing room, and I'm finally going to make it right, or make it worse. I honestly don't know which anymore.